Sweetie, he doesn't just choose the colour... Listen, because you might learn something now. He doesn't just choose the colour himself, darling. It is related to who I was in a previous existence. Mm-hmm.
And who was it you were in a previous life, then? I suppose you were the Elizabeth Taylor of the Ming Dynasty.
Well, close, yes.
So how come you've ended up just a mad, fat old cow?
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, what are we talking about tonight?
It's the British invasion, Jay.
Yep, we are talking about British sitcoms that have been remade, adapted, rehashed in the form of an American TV show. So, what is your take on British culture writ large? I feel like there's certain things, your James Bond, your Harry Potter, that originate in England but belong to the world. And then beyond that, there are these things that some people are into. Doctor Who, Monty Python, stuff like that. So what's your take? Were you ever into British stuff?
Yes, but it's kind of always because I heard it from someone cooler than me. You know, like somebody had an older brother that was really into Monty Python. And I think I was watching House at some point, and then somebody was like, you know, that guy's a comedian, right? And I'm like, what? So then I started watching Blackadder because Hugh Laurie is hilarious from back in those days on Blackadder. And so, yeah, I think it's a kind of a, I'm into it, but I don't feel like I'm ever the first one. You know what I mean? I always hear about it from other people.
Yeah, this was generally, at the time that we were growing up, of course, this BBC stuff was not as available as it is now, but it definitely,
that's true.
It was floating around out there. And yeah, my feeling was always there was just this telltale look to that stuff. It just always looked so cheap, like it was shot on cheap video or something. There was something about the like technological feel of it combined with the sort of cultural vibe that just it was kind of a turnoff to me with things like your Fawlty Towers. I
loved Fawlty Towers. That was later on, though. I got into that much later on.
I never got into Monty Python. The big exception for me was that I was really, really into Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy novels. And it's a similar thing to the phenomenon we're going to talk about with these shows, in the sense that a lot of the details of that Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy novel, it was reproduced as a BBC radio show and then a BBC television show, and then many years later as a sort of international movie. And there's certain elements of it, certain lines in the narration, certain lines of dialogue that are there in every version and are just like these sort of signature parts of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy thing. And, you recognize them. And then whenever the various versions veer away from it and start doing their own thing, you recognize that too, And so it's a similar thing, I think, to what we're going to see in some of these shows, the way you have an almost verbatim sort of update and then some very, meaningful differences.
Yes.
So what are our shows? What do we watch?
This week we're watching two shows that were originally British comedies that were remade for the U.S. audience and retooled in certain cases and sometimes completely overhauled. We're watching Man About the House, Series 1, Episode 1, Three's a Crowd. The American version is called Three's Company. See what they did there? Three's a Crowd, Three's Company. Season 1, Episode 1, A Man About the House. Little cyclical thing going on there. Then Absolutely Fabulous, Series 1, Episode 1, Fashion. And Cybill, Season 1, Episode 1, Virgin Mother Crone.
Yeah, so Man About the House, I had never really heard of before. This is going to be, I think, a very familiar thing that both of these American shows I was not aware were remakes of British shows.
Right.
And that's really normal in movies and TV shows and everything. You know, most people don't know that Three Men and a Baby was based on a French movie. You know, this is a pretty normal thing. Ideas are hard, and a lot of times, you know,
if they're made in a different language, we'll make them in ours. Oh, wait, English is the same. We just do it for a different audience.
Yeah, there's still, until relatively recently, I think, even across the pond stuff, let alone foreign language stuff, had to be remade if you wanted to give it to an American audience. I feel like we're finally at the point now where you don't need an American version of Parasite. People will just go and see Parasite.
Yeah. Well, and there was some like big EU legislation that happened for Netflix and the other streamers if they wanted to continue having clientele in the EU bloc countries. They had to have a certain percentage of their films had to be made in EU bloc countries.
Interesting.
And so that's why you're seeing, so like I see tons of Dutch stuff, tons of, Spanish stuff on my Netflix now because that was a deal they struck. That was like, if you want us to pay for your service and watch your other content, you better carry content that matches the countries where you have subscribers.
Yeah. So I had never heard of this Man About the House thing, but the way this begins is something I was very familiar with. The Thames production company with the little mirror image picture of the river and the Thames logo. Was this something that you were familiar with in childhood? I don't know if it was Count Duckula or Danger Mouse, something I watched as a kid. I feel like several things, had this logo at the front. Yeah,
you made a noise when it came up, and I don't have like a sense memory of it at all.
This was so iconic that the MTV sketch show, had their version of this for a handful of their episodes. They would have their sort of ironic reworking of these, like the CBS special thing.
Right.
And this was one of those things. So somewhere in the 80s,
there must have been a show.
Some of these Thames productions, definitely made their way over to Nickelodeon or something like that. But after that, this begins with something I feel like we've pointed out before, that sort of like black box theater energy, where we're going to have one actor all by themselves, no dialogue. We're just going to have them sort of like doing business and little like titters from the audience for the first like 2 or 3 minutes.
Right. You get the character Chrissy, who looks nothing like the Chrissy in the Three's Company that you and I grew up with. Chrissy looks an awful lot like Janet from our Three's Company that we grew up with, one. Right? So Chrissy in this one is dark-haired, and she's stumbling out of her room, and she is very hungover. And so we get a bunch of business of her like sort of attempting to make it to the couch and attempting to clean up some of the crazy leftover party supplies, and then hearing this loud kind of roaring sound in the other room and stumbling over there and realizing that her roommate, who we find out is named Joe, is vacuuming. And she unplugs the vacuum and she says, "What are you trying to do? Kill the dying? Or have you no respect for the dying?" or something like that. Yeah.
And then they have this little exchange that is going to be part of this sort of signature Man About the House, Three's Company thing. The one that's all hungover is going to have this joke about like, "Do you remember that girl last night who was up on top of the bar and dancing crazy and wouldn't stop talking," or whatever, all this embarrassing stuff? That was me, wasn't it? Right? And I feel like that's your equivalent of Arthur Dent in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy taking his aspirin, like the sort of like the building blocks that they're going to really rally around.
Well, and I mean, it has to be said, these shows are nearly dialogue like perfect.
Yeah,
like
except for when they're not, and the entrances are very interesting.
So
but
up
yes,
to
very
this point,
close.
up to this point, everything that's been said is also going to be said at the beginning of Three's Company. What I noticed is that there's a few things in Man About the House. It feels like these British shows, I said this to you before, they're a little bit longer.
Oh, yeah.
They feel like they're not doing the 22 minutes so they can get all the commercial breaks in. And so there's more packed in. And also they give room for a little bit more silence than the American version.
This whole quiet theatrical part that we're talking about at the beginning doesn't exist in Three's Company. It goes right into the dialogue.
Right into the vacuum. She like walks out. We see her for like 1 second in Three's Company.
Yeah,
like,
but there is no...
And then it's the vacuum cleaner and goes right into that dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. So they're both there almost immediately. But yeah, in this one, we get the dialogue between the two girls. We set up, okay, they are their roommates. One of them is hungover. They threw a party last night for their friend, their roommate, who had a baby. That was her baby shower.
No, it was her wedding reception.
Her wedding reception.
That was the big joke. It was like, oh, I was so obnoxious. I hope Eleanor isn't mad at me for being so drunk and ruining her wedding reception. And the blonde one, who in the British version is named Jo, and in the American version is named Chrissy, she says in both episodes, oh, don't worry, she had to leave halfway through because she went into labor, so she didn't see any of that. And she was like, oh, so that's the turnabout. It's that it was this wedding reception, but the bride went into labor.
Yeah, and so we're getting lots of world building. Everything is very economically setting up the premise of this show. The third roommate is out of the picture.
That's right. This is third roommate's out of the picture. They're very hip, like 1970s ladies. Pregnant before they got married. They have parties. This is who they are.
Yeah, and so the one of them goes into the bathroom, and we get, in this version, a very poorly disguised situation where, we, the audience, can plainly see, but we're supposed to suspend our disbelief and not notice that there is clearly a man in her bathtub.
Oh, we're supposed to notice, and then she only walks out for a second before she comes to the realization.
But she's in the bathroom milling around for several minutes.
Oh,
and
yeah,
there's clearly
she keeps
a dude
not looking. Because, in the British version, there's a curtain around him.
Yes,
and so,
which is translucent.
Right, but it's got a pattern. So it's sort of like you can tell somebody's in there, but she's not ever looking at it. She's, kind of yelling over her shoulder, having gotten over her hangover quickly, I guess, and is just she's going to go and take a bath. But so she goes in, she, reaches in, turns the water on, doesn't move the curtain, grabs something at the sink, doesn't move the curtain, never looks at it. And then just before she walks out of the room, she kind of pulls the curtain along behind her to open it and then walks out of the room. And so she doesn't see him in the moment, but by the time she gets out into the kitchen and is talking to Jo again, she's like, whoa. Hold on, there's somebody in the bathtub. And then they go in and they find a sleeping Robin Tripp or a sleeping Jack Tripper.
Yes. So Robin in the British version, he kind of looks like one of the monkeys, or I would also say maybe like a young Freddie Mercury. But yeah, he looks like a hip, 70s British dude. And he's, he was at this party too. He explains he's not even a gate crasher. He's like a friend of a friend of a gate crasher.
Yeah, a friend that I came with was a friend of one of the gate crashers.
And so
that's how you know what a rager this was.
Yeah. The studio audience just really eating this up. Again, the theatrical element of this, just the sort of live to tape vibe, the guy stands up soaking wet in the bathtub, has to get out, he's just drenched, and it's all real, like
Right.
you said,
He,
this set is getting soaked right before your eyes, and everyone is loving it.
Yeah. He stands up as he introduces himself and slips as he says his name is Trip as he's getting out of the tub. And so that's a joke that we see in the original that then plays again in Three's Company. The first thing that Jack Tripper does is he stands up and he, oh, hey, I'm Jack Tripper, and slides Jack Tripper and, does the same thing. They do this thing where they sort of one foot slips as they're getting out of the bath.
Looks dangerous as hell.
I know. And they end up doing a split on the edge of the bathtub. And I'm like, wow, youch.
Yeah, no, and it looks like if they did it wrong, then they could break their back on this fake bathtub. But so we get a sense, okay, we're about to meet this guy and learn about this, crazy shenanigans. But then we switch over to the grumpy older couple that lives downstairs, who happen to be their landlords. In both versions, they are the Ropers.
The Ropers, that's right. And they have a similar vibe.
Yeah.
Like the Mrs. Roper is like Mrs. Hannigan. She's got that
well, she looks like her, but not really.
No, exactly. She looks like her.
Yeah.
She's got the curly red hair up on top, and she's wearing a big muumuu and painting her nails. And, they have this relationship dynamic where she's the one in charge, and even though her husband's supposed to be the landlord and, thinks he's the head of the household, and she wants sex and he's not interested in it.
She is horny, and he's an old fuddy-duddy who's grumpy, doesn't know anything, and anytime he asks about anything to do with sex, it's always she explains it to him vis-a-vis that thing that we never do.
Right. It's a Peg Bundy, Al Bundy kind of situation, but earlier, gentler sort of version of that. But so they're this kind of miserable old couple that, snipes at each other but loves each other, and they are the downstairs landlords. We're
going to get the joke both times where the husband says something to the effect of, you'd be sacred if you went over to India. This was something all throughout the time that we were growing up. The notion that cows were sacred in India was just barely in our knowledge base as Americans.
Right.
So it would have this sort of tinge of gratification when you would make that joke, where you would get to make fun of somebody, but also sort of be like, haha, I know about India. And so this thing, I'm calling you fat, you're a fat cow, but it's going to take you a minute or two to realize it, because I'm going to say, like John Turturro says in Quiz Show, if you want to be worshipped, go to India and moo. We love those kind of jokes.
So I thought this joke worked way better in the British version, because it's a normal thing in British culture to call someone a cow. We're like, oh, I'm such a cow, oh, whatever. And so it landed better. Whereas when the same joke happened in Three's Company, I was a little bit oh, that was really mean.
Yeah.
It didn't land, even though it was the exact same setup, the exact same. I mean, no joke. This is line for line.
It is verbatim.
Remake.
So that's the Ropers. They're going to be grumpy. The wife is going to go up in a little while to kind of see what's what. But meanwhile, back with the main characters, we're getting Robin. His clothes are all wet, so he's asked them if there's anything he can wear. They're trying to sort of accommodate him, but so they've given him this woman's robe to wear, their roommate's robe, I guess.
Yeah, and it's the only, they're basically just we don't have anything that would fit you, but we have this robe, so you can wear that. And it's very frilly. The one in Man About the House, it's got feathers. It's yellow, and it's got sort of sparkly, shiny
this is
feathers
fun.
As well as regular feathers.
Yeah, fun with gender roles 101, right? This is standard sitcom stuff. What if a man was wearing a woman's frilly thing?
Right.
And they're going to get to work on, you're probably hungry, we'll make you some food. But first we get a gag that's repeated, again, almost verbatim in both shows, that I find so odd that they thought this was so funny that they needed to he wants to shave. He feels like he has to shave. Like, this was just so bizarre to me. Like, you wake up in these strange women's house.
Because he's asking to borrow all these different things.
But that's the thing. All of those other things make sense to me, Mike. I'm literally wearing cold, wet clothes.
Right.
Yes, please give me dry clothes.
So he's
I'm hungover and
razor?
I haven't eaten. I'm really hungry. Please, do you have anything to eat? But this idea that it's like 11 a.m. on like a Sunday morning, like, oh God, I just need to shave. Can I borrow a razor so I can shave?
Right.
She gives him something. She gives him shaving cream to put on his face.
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
then goes,
the next joke.
We use that to clean the bathtub. And he's like, oh my God, let me get this off. And yeah, it's this little slapstick moment.
It's like soft scrub.
Yeah, that to me was just like, this was such a long walk. Like, it was such a bizarre move that he needed to shave his face, and all for the joke of like, oh, we have a different kind of razor and we're going to give you like scrubbing bubbles to shave your face. But yes, that's another identical joke in both versions. And then we're going to get the story really sort of kicking into motion when he sits down to breakfast with them. And it turns out that whichever one of them cooks breakfast has no facility. Neither of them are good at cooking.
Right. Eleanor, the roommate who is now married and just had a baby and is off, living her life, and they're going to need to fill her spot in the house or in the flat. She was the cook. She did all of the cooking. And so there, in the British version, we get a nice little dialogue scene with the two girls where Robin is still like in the bathroom before they've discovered him. We get this little dialogue scene where they're explaining how they're like, neither one of them is good at cooking. Well, I'll try to do the eggs. Oh, what's this bit in the eggs? Oh, it's probably part of the nonstick coating, all this back and forth before Robin comes out, and then they sit down, and he's like, I don't care. It's okay if you guys can't cook. We see Jo scraping off the burn on the toast because she's burnt all the toast. Good. Yeah, you like burnt toast. That's why. But she's trying to scrape all the burn off, all the char off. And, they sit down to eat this breakfast, and Robin's like, it's funny. Inedible.
True to form, in the British version, he takes longer and has more of a polite effort to eat it. In the American version, he sort of surrenders quicker.
Well, everything in the American version is quicker. They cut out a lot of the setup, that little back and forth about how neither of them really cook. They go right into it in Three's Company, where he takes one bite and is like, oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure we can do better than this. What have we got in here? Goes right over the refrigerator.
Well, in both versions, they have the same exchange where he says, like, this is horrible. He says something rude, and then they go, well, can you do any better? And he goes, well, actually, yes. And the first thing I think both times is he says, I'm going to need some breadcrumbs. And one of them goes, oh, I've got some in my bed.
Right.
And that kind of made me giggle. And then,
so in the American version, it's Chrissy who says that. In the British version, it's Jo who says that. And in both cases, it's like, well, nobody makes breadcrumbs. They just happen when you eat bread.
Yeah. And then, they start, he starts making breakfast, and it comes out that he's a student at the Polytechnic or whatever.
Yeah, he's studying French cooking. And so in both times, he has this line where he's like, blah, 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 and says a bunch of French. And they're like, what is that? And he's like, it's French.
Now, a piece of dialogue that is in this version and not in the American version is they say something. It makes him say, I know what you're getting at, and I'm not, right? They don't spell it out at this point in the show, but he says, I'm not gay, even though I could tell that's what you're thinking.
Oh, right.
And that's something.
Because they were like, oh, you'll make somebody a nice wife someday because he cooks, because he's in like a fancy robe.
Yeah, which they gave him. Right. But yeah, he calls out, this is the first of several times that this is going to come up, where he says, I'm not gay. And it's just interesting to flag that, because that's going to play into both stories. But in the American one, that doesn't come up yet. That's not on anyone's mind.
From the beginning, in the American version, we see Jack Tripper hitting on Chrissy.
Yes. He is more of a cad. But in this case, we're getting Robin being just a very sort of down-to-earth, kind of hip, modern modern guy. You know,
Right.
he knows how to cook, and you know, he's being very nice and respectful, and he's, you know, asking them for the different ingredients, and we should really have such and such cheese, but we can improvise. And he's going to start making breakfast. And I feel like it's around this time that we start to really get into farce territory.
Yes.
Where the other prospective roommate shows
so the
up.
neighbor, Mrs. Roper, comes upstairs. She sees...
Right, she comes first.
She sees the man in the woman's robe. In both shows, this happens. She goes back downstairs and tells Mr. Roper they have a man up there, but he's dressed up like a woman. And Mr. Roper makes the same joke in both shows. How can you tell the difference?
And in both shows, they try to convince her that he is a woman.
Yeah, they push him out of the room really quickly so she doesn't say anything. Now, I know about Three's Company that they aren't allowed to have any men stay over, but that's not the case in Man About the House.
But whether it is a literal rule or not, the impression I get is that, you know, the very fun premise of this show does stem from this horribly sexist worldview where it's just like these grown women can't or shouldn't or can't be seen to have a guy there, right? It's all presented as like this crazy situation just happened to them. Who could help it that he passed out in the tub and woke up and they're just trying to do the right thing? Like it's this crazy series of events that they have to scramble to explain the fact that yeah, there's a guy here. Like there's a guy in our house at 11 a.m. on a Sunday. And then, of course, there's also the fact that he's wearing the woman's robe that makes it all the more like confusing and socially unacceptable. But it's interesting how this all just stems from like this very sort of small-minded notion is what gives us all of this fun kind of misunderstanding.
Right. Just that like it's not proper for women to have gentlemen over early in the morning because that means they spent the night. So I don't think Mrs. Roper cares that, you know, so much. I think she's just telling her husband they have a man up there who's dressed as a woman. And he's like, no, I'm sure it's a woman. You're confused. And she's like, no, it's a man. Meanwhile, the prospective new roommate has come over. In the British version, she's called Gabby. Her name's Gabriella, and she says, but my friends call me Gabby, and she never stops talking from the moment she walks in. So we get a nice little, you know, ha-ha eye roll at the fact that she's named Gabby. In the American version, she tells them to call her Patsykins or something like that.
Yeah, her name's Patricia Crawford.
Right.
But
but call me Pattykins
or something like
and
that.
And so she's, you know, obnoxious in her own way. In both cases, it's these women that they're wearing more like a suit. They've come over, they're kind of wearing more like a dressy woman's suit, and they talk a bit like this in both cases, doing a like low voice sort of thing, and never stopping to, this, and I love to see this, and oh, you ladies are going to be so, I just can't wait to live with you, going on and on like that. And then, so Mr. Roper comes in and sees the woman who he thinks is the one that his wife saw and is claiming as a man, and goes over and starts like poking at her like, you can't fool me, look at these are and he's got his hand on her breasts.
Yeah, she screams, he squeezed my bosoms, right?
Yes.
And so he's all flustered. Mr. Roper is like, anybody could make that mistake.
Groper.
Yes, and so he runs out, and then Gabrielle is scandalized. She says, you know, I could never live under the same roof as somebody like that. She, you know, storms off in a huff. And we get, you know, we can see the beginnings, like I said, very farcical, very noises off. You've got all this mistaken identity. Somebody saw something and they think that person is this person. But so everything is starting to sort of formulate here because their prospective roommate isn't going to be available.
Right.
So we go back up to the Ropers, right? And we get more with them.
Well, so I think these kind of happen at the same time. They go back down to the Ropers, and the Ropers are arguing about, whether or not it was a man or a woman again. And Mr. Roper's like, no, I felt her bosoms, like she is an actual woman. And Mrs. Roper's like, you did what? How come I'm not getting that action? And she's like, we must not have seen the same person. She convinces him to go back upstairs. But before that happens, in the British version, we get a scene that's not in the American version, which is Robin says no. He says, I already have a line on an apartment. I told this guy, Douglas, that I would share his flat. So I'm going to call him. So he gets his pants, he gets the number out of his pants, and he goes over to the phone and he calls him. And turns out that Douglas, who wants to be called Dougie, Dougie, is that right?
Dougie or even Ducky. It was hard to tell.
Something like that. So he wants to be called Dougie, and he's like, yeah, sure, come on over. My boyfriend is having a tantrum right now, but he's leaving and he's moving out. So, you can come and take his place or whatever. And then that's when we realize, or Robin starts to realize, Dougie is gay and wants him, and he's like, no, I'm not gay. And Dougie's like, oh, well, then I'm not interested. And he's like, yeah, no, I don't think this would be a good fit, and hangs up.
This whole thing was a little weird. He says something about, like, I should have realized when he brought me that box of chocolates. Like, I guess we're supposed to understand, like, Robin, like, this guy, wanted him as, like, a sort of, like, roommate with benefits, I guess, and Robin wasn't into it. This is twice now that the gay thing has been, has come up in this version.
So in the early 70s, it was technically, homosexuality was decriminalized in the UK, although that hadn't extended to, like, Scotland and Northern Ireland yet. So, I think they probably are having to go above and beyond just within the culture to try to show that, like, we're going to say this guy is gay, but he's really not. Look, no, we're going to say he's gay. We're going to say that because that's going to be the crux of the joke, but he's really not. And I think they're going a little harder on that than they have to in the American version. In the American version, it's very clear that he's not.
Well, I was just going to say, they go harder and lighter. Like, in some ways, the American version is more heavy-handed by making him a cad. They make it clear that he's not gay.
Well, but so I don't know about the British version because I've not watched any more of the episodes, but I know in the American version, Jack, for like a lot of season 1, just like in Bosom Buddies, is like consistently pretending to be gay every time the Ropers come around. So he gets off the phone and he's like, well, I guess I don't have that other option. So if you guys are still looking for somebody, I would love to take you up on that offer. And they're like, great, okay, ground rules. And they just like immediately lay down, like, this is, purely platonic. There will be no hanky-panky. If it even for a second looks like there's going to be any, like, that's a big no, and you're out on here. Everything is going to be split, like, evenly, da-da-da-da. They just kind of lay it all out there, roommate rules, 101, boom.
Yeah, and then around this time, the Ropers come back, and that's where we really have the whole sort of, like, everything kind of hits the fan, farce-wise. We see, oh, this is the guy. No, that's not the same guy. And they have to explain why he's wearing the woman's dress and everything. And he says, well, I'm going to live here. And we get in the British version, a bloke living with 2 birds? We can't have that. The landlord just objects on moral grounds to the notion that this could happen.
Right.
And so they all kind of separate. And this is also, I feel like, a little bit of a difference in how it plays out. In this one, whoever's left with the Ropers, we don't see what they say. We see Robin talking to Joe.
And Chrissy stays with the Ropers.
Right. And they basically say, like, I'm just going to ask him really nicely, basically. Yes. Like, maybe we can convince him.
Right.
And all that really does is give us a few minutes with the Ropers sort of off camera.
Right.
So that we can come back.
Right. They can be told, and then we can have the reveal. Joe and Robin come back in the room, and the same thing happens in Three's Company, right? Three's Company, it's Janet that stays with the Ropers, and Chrissy and Jack go into the kitchen. And this is where Jack's like hitting on Chrissy a little bit in the American version, but in the British version, we don't get any of that.
What we do get, though, is Mrs. Roper hitting on Robin in both versions. We get the very funny part where he goes, all right, I guess I'll put my trousers on. And Mrs. Roper goes, if you feel you must.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yes. So then they come back in, and the Ropers are like immediately like, oh, you're a good boy. We're so happy to have you. In the British version, the Mr. Roper's just kind of uncomfortable and is like, okay, and kind of trying to get out of there. And Mrs. Roper is like, oh, cutie, we're so glad to have you. Thank you so much for, staying with us. And blah, blah, blah. In the American version, Mr. Roper's like, good on you, sir. Like, proud.
We can get to that when we get to it. I found that.
Yeah. And then Mrs. Roper's like, oh, my baby, and like patting his face. And so out they go. And Jack and Robin are both like, what just happened? Why the turnabout? And I like the way the British version does it better. They're sitting down on the couch, and he's like, wow, that was really kind of a turnabout. And Chrissy and Joe are there, and Joe's like, yeah, no, I can't believe it. And Chrissy's like, yeah, I ended up having to tell him you're a poof. And so it was like a great little reveal, and that was the end of the episode. It was just on the word, oh, I had to tell him you were a poof.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what to make of the word puff, but I feel like I'm going to write it up to culture and time differences and not really dig in too much.
No, it was totally of its time. I don't think it was like mean-hearted or mean-spirited at all. It was very cute, and it was a nice, light, fun way to end. Whereas in the American version, she's like, yeah, I had to tell him you were gay. And it's Janet who says it. She's like, yeah, well, it'll be fine though, because I had to tell him you were gay. And she sort of has this kind of like mean-spirited thing in the way she says it, because she doesn't like the fact that Jack is already hitting on Chrissy and she's not the one he's interested in.
Yeah, but in terms of wrapping up this Man About the House, I mean, it ends just like that. Like it's one of those, like, it's a cliffhanger, essentially.
Right,
it's
like what's going to happen in the next episode now that the neighbors and the landlords think he's gay?
Yeah, so this was fun. I don't know. I was surprised at the extent to which it was exactly the same thing as Three's Company. But I think, if anything, that
Three's Company is exactly the same. Although I do remember when we first did Three's Company on the show, I remember reading that it was like they had gone through several rewrites. They apparently had like 5 or 6 pilots of Three's Company, and all with like different cast members. Like they weren't able to find a Chrissy until the last minute, and then it kind of all clicked and came together. And they had done a bunch of different versions like of the script, and I'm like, that's so interesting. What were the other versions when this one is basically exactly like the British one? I wonder what the other, like, what had they kept in that they ended up not keeping in? Did they try to do the theatrical thing at the beginning of having
or it could have been that they were more different, and then they said this isn't working.
Maybe.
We need to go back to the original. All right, so let's move on to Three's Company.
Three's Company. Season 1, Episode 1, Man About the House. They've titled their show as an homage to the show they're about to do, which is basically a line-for-line remake, as we've said. One of the things that I thought was really fun about this was you had the moments where you already get to see John Ritter's amazing physical comedy. Like, you get to see that early on, and it was there. It was already set up for him in the original source material. So they clearly went out looking for somebody who could do this, like, wacky physical comedy when they were casting.
Yeah, the physical comedy, and also the thing that we always say about him, like, you want somebody who could credibly come across as gay if he wanted to be, but could also be a genuine sort of heartthrob and like a really handsome, charismatic leading man that you would also believe that these women in the show and the women that watch the show in real life are going to be into. And yeah, he's got that 70s, 80s low-key leading man thing in the tradition of the Alan Alda, a little more intellectual, a little more soft-spoken. We don't need to be big and strapping and barrel-chested anymore. And so, yeah, I feel like where he falls in that sort of like manliness scale and like his sort of version of charisma, I think is very well suited to this sort of setup.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things I thought was really interesting was we know that there were several spin-offs of Three's Company. There was Three's a Crowd, which is the name of the pilot episode of Man About the House. It's called Three's a Crowd. But there was a spin-off for Three's Company here in the States called Three's a Crowd. And there was a spin-off called The Ropers here in the States. Well, they also had that spin-off in the UK. So in the UK, they had two spin-offs of Man About the House. One was called Robin's Nest, and that was Robin gets a girlfriend and they move in together. And that was, I think, the first time on UK television you had an unmarried couple cohabitating. So that was like a big deal for that show. This show, Man About the House and Robin's Nest, were big hits, as was their version of The Ropers, which I think was called, it was their first names. It was like Maud and George or whatever. I don't remember what her first name was, but whatever Mrs. Roper's first name was, that was what they did. So those were big spin-off hits, whereas the Ropers didn't do very well here in the United States. I think it only ran for like one season, and that was when the Feelies came in, because the Ropers got their own show. And then Three's a Crowd, I don't know that was the same. Do you remember that show? I don't think that was the same as Robin's Nest.
We're going to get, like you were saying, I don't know exactly what the difference is duration-wise, but there is definitely, it's going to feel much more sort of economical in the Three's Company American version. There's going to be no black box theater opening. We start pretty much immediately with dialogue. We've got the two of them talking. And then just, even though, you know, we're going to get the same exact setup, like I said before, we're going to get the joke about that girl doing all that crazy stuff. She did this, she did that. Yeah. It was me, wasn't it? Ha, 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 ha.
Yeah, everything is faster.
Yeah, everything is faster. When we get into the bathroom, you can definitely see the American production values, I think, a little bit over the British ones, where we don't see, you know, John Ritter hiding in the bathtub until they want us to. Right. And everything, again, just happens quicker and just a little more sort of punchy. He
doesn't, like, I remember in the British version, he gets a little moment in the bathtub where he's sleeping and they're watching him, and they try to, like, tickle him awake with, like, you know, wiggling something in front of his nose. And it's all slower in the British version. In the American version, it's like, what should we do? Oh, let's grab a thing. Oh, and they tickle his nose right away. He turns into the water. He lays there for a second like he's going to drown. Oh, sputter, 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 cough, cough, cough. Turn on the, you know, oh, why is it blowing in my face? Oh, I got to turn off the water. Oh, I got to turn off the water over here. You know, all of the things happening really quickly in that moment in the tub.
Yeah, it's an interesting contrast because obviously going from England to America, I'm not as up on the subtle differences between, you know, the different British dialects and whatnot. But watching these two girls, I didn't realize before the extent to which Janet is kind of like a tough New York Laverne and Shirley type girl. You know, like she's got a little bit of that thing going on, whereas the other one is a little more sort of like prim and proper. And so, yeah, that, you know, the British ones, I was just thinking, oh, they've got that kind of mod look and they're kind of like the Pigeon Sisters from The Odd Couple.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
here,
they were like the Pigeon Sisters.
Yeah, but here I'm getting that difference between the two of them that I think when we dropped into random, you know, season 5, episode 10, I never really noticed.
Right. Well, season 5, Chrissy was gone and we were on like the third version of a Chrissy. That's probably why. And then the other episode that we watched, there was no no Chrissy in it really at all, right? It was when he was afraid to fly, and then he did the fun dance, and that one just had Janet and Jack. And so, yeah, I think this is the very first episode, so they haven't gone fully. Suzanne Summers is playing it a little ditzy, for sure. It's more just like, it's more just like Daffy. It's like, oh, I can't help it when a guy starts sweet talking. When a guy starts sweet talking, I just, I fall for it. And her friend Janet is like, don't do that. Like, you need to, like, if this guy's going to be living with us, you can't fall for any, charm. Like, he has to be off limits. And she's like, well, I'm just glad I have you, because you'll keep me from, falling for his sweet talking. And that is kind of when they're deciding on the ground rules. That's the conversation. And that was very different. That was like the only part, I think, that was really significantly different than the British version. The British version, the girls don't have that conversation. They just kind of look at each other. They're on the same page. And then they tell the guy what it's going to be.
Well, let's just say, I think that this whole characterization of this guy is a little different. I think it's interesting that they changed the name from Robin to Jack, right? I feel like here in America, Robin's a girl's name. Come on, we don't want any guy named Robin. Give me a Jack, right? I need a Jack, like it's just Jack Reacher, Jack Ryan, and yeah, it's like, if this guy is going to be the center of our show, of our sitcom, sure, he's a cook, fine, but come on, we need a little bit of that young Bill Murray, Tom Hanks energy. He needs to be, like I said before, a cad. He needs to be a flirt. He needs to be chasing tail,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that whole vibe is just not something that they try to instill in Robin's character. And so it does affect everything. We don't get in this the two mentions that we had earlier about, oh, am I gay? No, I'm not. What we do get instead, he makes a joke about when they give him the robe, they do the same beat of giving him the female roommate's robe.
Yeah,
and he
and
says,
this one isn't feathery, though. This one's just
no,
flowery.
But it's girly in a different way.
It's flowery, it's really short, and
yes.
It's got ruffles.
Yeah, and it's like kind of a girly color. And he
Whereas
says,
the other one looks like, like a diva would wear it.
Yeah. No,
it's
this
very
one,
Miss Piggy, but not pink.
It almost looks like the little short set that Sean Connery wears in one of the early Bond movies. But yeah, he says, if the guys at the gym could see me now, they'd make me turn in my towel.
Right. Like, you're not allowed to be gay at the gym?
Yeah. First of all, not only that, but like, what, if they saw you at this woman's house and you had to...
if they saw you in this little robe, you lose your man card.
Yeah, no, obviously that's what they're saying. It's the more American take. It's the more like,
the gender roles
God.
in that way.
Yeah, don't let anybody see me like this.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go through, like you're saying, basically the same story beats. Let us fix you breakfast. We get the same shaving thing, right? 5 o'clock shadow is like not permitted in either of these worlds. So yeah, we get the same joke about, here's some shaving cream. Never mind, it's stuff to clean the bathtub. And we're going to meet the Ropers just like the other time. Same basic dynamic with them. And yeah, everything is kind of the same. We get Patricia Crawford instead of Gabriella, but the same case of mistaken identity,
yep.
The being spotted by the wife at first. In this one, the roommate does explicitly say that's a woman. And she goes up and doesn't know what to make of it and tells the husband. And yeah, it's all kind of the same stuff. One thing I thought was funnier in this one, when Mr. Roper comes down to investigate and he encounters Patricia Crawford, he goes, take off those clothes. I thought that was funny because he thinks she's a man in disguise.
Yes. But he says that in the British version too, doesn't he?
He says the same line, but I just thought that he said it funnier.
He said it funnier. It landed better. Yeah. I mean, look, I think what I really enjoyed about this was because I'm so familiar with the American version, because I watch so much Three's Company and I love John Ritter. I think he's so funny. And it was so interesting to watch this original source material and see it it's the same humor. And in this episode, it's basically line for line the same jokes and same show. But it is like you're watching the basic differences between British humor, subtle, dry, cutting, and American humor, over the top, guffawy and
and horny.
Well.
There's that whole scene where it really starts to diverge is when the three of them are talking to each other, and he can't stop hitting on the blonde one.
Yeah.
And just, it's like everything he says or everything they say, he has some little Zach Morris-esque sort of turnaround. And It's funny when you think about it, because you look at these two guys, you listen to the sound of their voice and everything, their natural presence. It would be much more natural, I think, for me to believe that John Ritter is the one who's sort of tame and harmless, and this British guy is the one who's got a few tricks up his sleeve. But like you're saying, it's the difference in sensibilities of the cultures, where it's come on, primetime sitcom. We need this guy to be a little randy,
Right. Well, and I think that is also true about Robin in the British version.
Yeah.
It's just it's not being thrown in your face.
No, he's got some chill.
Exactly. So it's just not, and to me, it's the difference in the sensibilities of the humor. I really, I enjoyed the scenes between the three of them in the British version, because they were kind of all of them having a little bit of zing in their dialogue.
Yeah.
They were all sort of saying something, but saying something else, and kind of would be, if they were talking to Robin, they would also, with the corner of their eye, be looking at, their friend, the other girl, and kind of also saying two things at once with their eyes and their dialogue. And so I really appreciated that about the British one. Whereas, like I said, American version, very straightforward. The laughs are the laughs. The jokes are the ones that were on the paper. And then you have Jack Tripper, John Ritter making funny faces.
Yeah, well, and also I think with the older couple, the Ropers, I think the actual script was 20% meaner. I think they added stuff in the American version. I noticed some of their exchanges, they do just go a little further.
Right.
They'll have basically the same dialogue, and then the guy will be like, why don't you just shut up? Why
don't you die?
Yeah, they just go a little further to establish, just in case you couldn't tell, they hate each other.
Right. These zingers, these mild, dry wit zingers are not enough. We have to go one harder, just so the American audience will understand.
So, yeah, we get that same difference in their characters is continuing now as they're starting to formulate this idea of why don't you live with us? Because, again, Mr. Roper, Mr. Groper has scared off Patricia Cromwell or Crawford or whatever. And so, but like you're saying, it has to go completely differently. Instead of just saying, here's the ground rules, we're a couple of tough broads, they need to really deal with the fact that he's aggressively hitting on her.
Yes.
And just the whole dynamic being different. And then we get the Ropers come down, and it sort of dovetails back to being the same exact show for a little while, where Jack says, oh, hi, I'm Jack, I'm going to live here. And Mr. Roper says, no, you don't. But he says guys and girls instead of blokes and birds.
Right.
But he says you can't live with them.
Right. And like I said, there is no set rule in the Man About the House that can't happen. But in the world of Three's Company, there is a rule. And so they are making an exception for him, and only because
a rule
he's
in
gay.
this particular house, or in the state government?
Well, so not in the state government. So in the American version,
there are crazy laws on the books, more than 5 women living in a house together is technically a brothel, things like that. It wouldn't surprise me.
No, I got the impression that in Three's Company, it's their house. They have an apartment upstairs that they rent out.
So it's just their sense of decency.
Right, but they own it. They own it.
Yeah.
They're the landlords, but they're the owners as well in Three's Company, and so they make the rules. right?
Yeah.
But in the British version, that's a council estate. And so he, as a landlord, would be a council landlord that's put there by the British government.
Yeah.
So no, there isn't a rule that says that in Man About the House.
I just think the larger point is in either case, it's just fucked up to be telling a 24-year-old woman, like, you know, your male friend can't be hanging out in your house at 10 a.m. But yeah, that's the world we live in.
Or at least the world we lived in 1976.
Yeah, and so they're going to go separate again, but this time, instead of Jack saying, let me try to appeal to him, let me try to grovel and see if it works, he says, screw him, I'm just going to go back in there and tell him off.
Right.
Right? It's the same thing, we just need to contrive a reason to have an unseen, off-camera conversation, and then, Jack's going to come in and say, let me give you a piece of my mind. And this is what you were talking about before, where Mr. Roper is like, oh, please, don't say anything. Never mind. I misunderstood. You're welcome to stay here.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, I was not.
He's like, I love the gays.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I just the vibe that I got from Mr. Roper for a show that takes place in 1976, I would not have assumed that he would be so enlightened about his LGBT community. You know, I thought he would be like, well, now you really have to leave.
No, that was a choice he made as an actor, I think. Good for him.
Yeah, they're all fully on board in both shows. Yeah, being gay is basically a loophole where you get to live with these two women.
That's right.
And we're going to get the same thing. They leave. Everyone's like, okay, great. But why did he change his mind? And then, like you said, we get the slightly more sort of explicit Americanized version. I told him you were gay. Roll credits.
And that's it.
Yeah. So look, this was fun. Like we said, you know, it's interesting to see the way they obviously, you know, they didn't feel the need to start from scratch. They hewed to this original as much as they could or as they felt that they needed to, but then there were certain things, like certain fundamental things that they're like, no, you know, if this is going to be like a sex comedy in America, then, you know, it can't quite be so polite, and, you know, the guy needs to be horny.
Yeah, I guess.
All right. Moving on to Absolutely Fabulous.
Absolutely Fabulous, Series 1, Episode 1, Fashion.
Yeah, so this is going to be an interesting contrast. We had our first pair of shows, very heavy overlap. We talked all about it, verbatim script excerpts. Now we're going to have a much more loosey-goosey sort of adaptation.
Right.
So what's the behind-the-scenes story with how Absolutely Fabulous mutated into Cybill?
Well, so Cybill is known for just drawing on many different things.
Are we talking about Cybill the person or Cybill the show?
Cybill the show.
Okay.
Chuck Lorre is the showrunner, or was the showrunner for the first 2 seasons. He got fired after a dispute with him and Cybill Shepherd.
He's got to be pretty early in his rise.
Yeah. Cybill was one of his earliest ones. Then he had Dharma and Greg, 2.5 Men, Big Bang, you know, the ones that we know and love. But he also was the creator, showrunner for Grace Under Fire. And that was just before Cybill, a few years before. They kind of ran concurrently. But he also worked on Roseanne. He worked on Charles in Charge as a writer. And so he was in and around, you know, trying to be out there and producing. He did some producing for Roseanne as well. And so Cybill is one of his earliest big hits. Like I said, he hit Grace Under Fire, but it is known for stealing plots and like scene for scene storylines from Ellen, which was another kind of big show that was on in the early 90s, mid 90s. Yeah. And then its parts of its premise are taken from Absolutely Fabulous. So Absolutely Fabulous is just what it sounds like. It's a fabulous show from the BBC. And I guess it was like the 90s, early 90s is when it started. And so the setup for this show is that you have this woman who's like a PR exec or a fashion executive or whatever. And she is a complete alcoholic, a complete mess. Like if you imagine the like Miranda from Devil Wears Prada, right?
Sure.
Right. If you imagine that character, but can't actually get anything done because she's like not even a functioning alcoholic.
Yeah.
So that is like, it's her in Absolutely Fabulous. That's Eddie. And then you've got her best friend, Patsy. And the way that Cybill kind of took from this is Cybill is the main character. She doesn't really parallel Edie or Eddie very much, but Christine Baranski, who plays Marianne, who's the best friend, is the like, drunken, tall, skinny, sort of former model, but not really, because that's not her backstory. But so Patsy is this, former model, drunken, disheveled, cocaine-addled, wild party girl who is aging.
Yeah, and there's also going to be the mother-daughter angle of this that actually, in these initial episodes anyway, really is kind of front and center. Like I said before, I wasn't into this. Absolutely Fabulous, Fawlty Towers, Monty Python. These were all things I was aware of in the 90s and caught little glimpses of. But yeah, if you ask me, I would say Absolutely Fabulous is about a pair of ladies that go around town and get drunk. And in this...
I mean, basically, yeah.
But
that's like what you're speaking to is that was the source material. It was originally a sketch on the French and Saunders sketch show, which Jennifer Saunders plays. She writes Absolutely Fabulous and she plays Eddie. But it was like a modern mother and daughter was what the sketch was called. And it was all about this teenage daughter having to be the grown-up because her mom is such a mess.
Yeah. And so in this Absolutely Fabulous incarnation, we don't get the friend until later. We get a long scene that, just like Man About the House, starts with a hangover.
Right.
And we got to get into this mise en scène. Because for a show, this has in common with Man About the House that they both feel live. They both have a studio audience that feels real. This does not feel like the Jetsons' canned laughter. However, the first shot of Absolutely Fabulous is a straight looking down, like the camera is on the ceiling, looking down on the woman, this main character, in bed as she wakes up hungover.
Yes.
And then throughout the next scene, as she comes down and starts interacting with the daughter, we have camera moves out of, Scorsese's most ambitious outings here. Like, there is a lot of camera work that I'm looking at this going, what is this? Like, this really does feel live. And the closest thing I could guess, not having looked into it or anything, is that this is a live multicam sitcom like any other with just really ambitious camera work. And there are guys with steady cams and stuff or cameras on tracks or whatever. If you're in the audience, you have to sort of look around this guy doing this crazy orbit around this woman as she's, delivering her lines or whatever. Just very ambitious blocking and shooting and stuff for what seems like a filmed live sitcom.
Yeah, well, and the director is this guy named Bob Spires, or Spears, potentially. I don't know how to say it, but he is also known for Spice World, great movie.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah, and Fawlty Towers. So, he was known to this, like, comedy group. He also did some directing on the French and Saunders sketch show.
I gotta say, what his style reminds me of is Mr. Thomas Schlamme, your buddy that films all the Aaron Sorkin
Sorry,
things.
you need to call him Tommy so the rhyming convention works.
Most of those shows are single camera dramas, but that Sports Night show had that weird element, kind of like Square Pegs, where there was like an audience, sort of. You would hear this faint laughing, but they didn't totally commit to it. It was a little bit neither fish nor fowl like that, but it had the same thing of like, I think this is filmed in that multi-camera way, but he's doing all of his gliding and, tracking and stuff like that. But so we get into it. Like I said, this friend is nowhere to be seen for the first half of the show. This is all about a crazy, drunken, hungover mom and her put together, sort of uptight teenage daughter. But we get this very long sort of Tennessee Williams-esque drama where, the mother is going through these crazy mood swings and, it starts out
trying
funny.
to get the attention of her daughter over and over again.
Yeah, and the daughter is very put upon, and it just really has this sense of like, okay, we're seeing this whole sort of emotional cornucopia happen in this woman over this, 5-7 minutes. And then the sort of story makes its way to the fore. She's freaking out about a fashion show because, like you said, she's a fashion editor or something like that. And she's got to put together this event. And, that sort of takes us through to the rest of the episode. The friend is going to come up. They're going to go into the limo and they're going to be sort of boozing it up in the limo. And it starts to resemble what I imagined absolutely fabulous being. These two ladies about town, wine bottle in hand, doing stuff.
Right. So the daughter is trying to extract a promise from the mother that she won't drink anymore because she's not able to control herself. She winds up, sleeping until, 9:30 and not able to, get on about her business with life. And it's bad for her and she doesn't feel good and she's worried about being fat. So here are all the things that you would be helped if you just stopped drinking. And so she eventually extracts this promise after, like you said, the Tennessee Williams cat on a hot tin roof-esque mood swings that we see her go through. And so she eventually promises that she's not going to drink, but of course that doesn't mean wine. That just means the hard stuff. And so she gets into the car and Patsy arrives. Patsy basically is like, your children are ungrateful. You should get rid of them. Like she's just like, they're disgusting. Those disgusting little roaches, they ruined your body. They never show up for you. They're awful. Get rid of them. Don't pay any attention to them.
She has a funny line where Eddie goes, well, you've given up drinking before. And Patsy goes, yeah, it was the worst 8 hours of my life.
Right.
But yeah, I have to say, I like the daughter. She is really funny. She is so deadpan and like, she just really commits to it. And she's got that sort of like instantaneous, she says something when the mom comes out like dressed for work and she's got a loud shirt that something like Parker Lewis would wear that you would call a vomit shirt.
Yes.
And the daughter says something like, I could throw up on it for you or something.
Right, because she was saying she needed something to go over it. And she was like, I could throw up on something for you. Because we had like 5 different options for like an overcoat that was going to go over this like jumpsuit that had a fancy name across it. She's like, well, everyone will know because it's Le Journée or something like that. So then, like we said, Patsy arrives and rides in the car to work. And as they're on their way to Eddie's work, Patsy is like, hey, don't we have to go by this restaurant that has great lunch and even better martinis? And she's like, no, I can't. I said I wouldn't. I'm not going to, I have to go in. I'm barely holding things down to, here. And of course that doesn't happen. And they end up going to lunch and they end up spending awful lot of time there and drinking a lot. And then, Patsy's like, oh, well, you don't feel good. Here, take some Coke. And she like throws Coke at her. And so, I mean, it's just like wild and ridiculous. And she never gets into work. And then so she finally does. She finally gets into work and she is like, okay, so catch me up. What's going on? She's got this assistant who is kind of like daffy. Her name's Bubble.
Yeah, she's a fun character also. I liked her.
She has like, she sort of floats back and forth between being kind of an idiot, but also being like good at her job.
Yeah.
And so it's like, she just doesn't get some of the things I think about the fashion industry that Eddie just like knows intrinsically.
Yeah, but she also isn't drunk. And
right.
So like she has that going for her. They find out that Yasmin Labam has cancer. canceled.
Right. She's the big model that they were going to have.
Everything is going wrong. So we get, of course, after this boozy lunch that you're talking about, she's sitting there at the office with this tall glass full of red wine. And, we're kind of getting the idea, like the alcohol is pretty key to the concept of this show.
Right. She's just going to sniff the wine. She's not going to drink the wine because she's promised her daughter that she wouldn't be drunk, even though she's already broken the promise and had drinks. She's just gonna she won't be drunk.
Yeah, and the friend meanwhile is walking around drinking wine straight out of the bottle.
Yes, and filling up her glass the rest of the way.
Yeah, this is an experience I knew all too well. I won't sermonize about it, but the relationship that these people have with alcohol for most of us is very untenable in the long run. And this thinking how this is 10 years after Arthur, with Dudley Moore.
Yeah. It's
a similar thing where it's just like the concept of our movie is he's drunk all the time. He's a funny guy and he's drunk, and that's kind of what it's about, And in the case of both Arthur and this, the remake does away with the alcohol. And, in both cases, maybe you're left going like, so what's it about again? But anyway, very much. It's a very boozy show.
So she kicks it into gear, sniffing the wine, but not drinking it. And she is just we see now why she is the head of this fashion magazine and in charge of, she's apparently in charge of it all. That's why if she doesn't show up to work, somebody else will get stuff done because she owns it. But yeah, we see how she got where she got to, right? Because within the course of an afternoon, just a few hours, she solves all the problems, makes the event 17 times better than it was going to be in the first place on a shoestring at the last minute, and just pulls it all together. And it's amazing. And then she goes out to celebrate.
I didn't totally track that. This sequence confused me a little bit. So as she is getting into gear, like you said, the mise en scène starts getting more extreme. They start doing these Dutch angles where the camera is turned on its side in the office, the last office scene they have as things are getting more frantic. And then they show you parts of the fashion show. She's drunk.
Yes.
And so, she's broken her promise. She unleashes her inner beast or whatever. And so the whole thing is played kind of crazily. And I wasn't totally sure if I was supposed to understand that the fashion show was a wild success, whether she just kind of had a wild time. It just wasn't super clear to me, this beat of how this all turned out.
Right. Well, so I think I think you're supposed to follow the gaze of the camera, which is from Eddie's perspective, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be seeing that it's frantic and crazy, like you said, with the Dutch angles. And then she goes off to the fashion show and, has this rip-roaring time. And she's the one in charge and she's having a blast. So from her perspective, it's a success and she's the boss. So everybody has to think it's a success, even if it is, from an outsider's perspective, potentially a total mess.
Yeah.
We don't know that. And we would have to assume that in order to go down that road. But I think the show kind of wants us to think what Edie thinks, or Eddie thinks, that this is the bee's knees and she's had a great night. And so they go back to the office and Patsy's like, come on, they've got a bottle of Jack Daniels or something, and she's trying to get her to drink whiskey, and she's like, no, I told Saffron I wouldn't. Her daughter's name's Saffron. She's like, I told Saffron I wouldn't, and I'm not going to drink, and I said I wouldn't, and wine doesn't count, and it's fine, and but I'm not going to have the hard stuff. She can't see me drunk. That's right, I just won't get drunk. Okay, I can have some as long as I don't don't get drunk. She's already like falling all over herself, can't stand, can't talk, but she doesn't think she's drunk yet. So then they pour the whiskey and they're in the office having the, you know, continued after party. And it cuts to this like dream sequence of her as a teenager coming home wasted.
Yes, this was something I related to a lot as a former heavy drinker. Not that I had this experience as a kid with my parents, but this thing we get, this impressionistic flashback where she's talking to these very sort of straight-laced, mild-mannered parents of hers, you know, these normies.
Right.
Who are like, hello, honey, how was the concert? And she's just falling down drunk and trying to talk to them.
Like literally falls in the hallway 3 times before she can make it up the stairs to her parents' little drawing room where they're sitting.
Yeah, so this is like this core memory for her that she goes back to every time that she's like, she has to, you know, put on airs and pretend to be sober. And she's going to have to try to do this for her daughter.
Yes.
She literally like spills out of the car when they finally take her home. It's a really funny shot.
Yes, it's a great like physical comedy moment. Patsy comes around and opens the door and she just like takes a header like into the gutter on the side of the road and then like front rolls onto the sidewalk. And her daughter's standing at the door in a bathrobe with her arms crossed, just shaking her head.
Yeah.
And she can't get up, like she can't right herself. She's just like flopping around, half in the gutter, half on the sidewalk. And she, like while this is all going on, Saffron closes the door and just turns the lights off and goes to bed. Whereas in the flashback, she had gotten away with it with her parents. In the flashback, her mom keeps asking her all these questions and wants her to like tell her dad about the concert. Her dad is like my dad. He has like 2 words. He's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like not speaking at all. And then she leans in close. The mom leans in close to teenage Eddie and is like, oh, is that cider I smell on your breath, dear? Oh, you better go upstairs. Like her mom just laughing it off that her daughter has had a little too much to drink because it, you know, it was, I guess, cute at that time or something. So she sends her off.
And they're just so naive.
Right. And so she, like in her mind's eye, that's what she was going to pull on her daughter. Well, not even close. She can't even get off the sidewalk. She's flopping around like a fish.
Yeah, it ends. The very last shot is her clawing at the kitchen window, like trying to get out. Like she's the cat that's
let me
locked out.
in.
Yeah, and so to me, what this has in common with the Man About the House thing is just the theatricality. Like they both really feel, like I said, that like you can feel those, whether it is the differences in the production value or something, the little like extra spaces and stuff. Like it really feels like they just kind of started the cameras and had this, you know, this little troupe acted out, you know, and the reactions from the audience and everything feel really real. And yeah, it's very fun. Again, like the fact that the whole premise is that they drink all the time makes it like in modern times, maybe not like, you know, not the most wholesome thing to watch.
I think that's I mean, honestly, though, I think a lot of people still now would love a show like this. They don't care that there's a lot of boozing. That's in every, you know, like almost every show. That's still a thing. So I definitely think that this still, I mean, it's a cult classic, right? Like I think it's definitely a huge hit. It's not even a cult hit in the UK. Like it was a huge hit. They started it. The BBC put it on their like second channel. They're like BBC Two or whatever. And they didn't think that this was going to be a big, huge hit. They thought that, you know, like the people who basically lived in like the 1 square mile around Soho would get it and nobody else would. And it became such a big hit that the second season and beyond, it moved over to BBC proper and has had all these Christmas specials. That's like the mark of an amazing British show is if you, you know, you get to do a Christmas special because those are like, you know, when we were growing up, they played like Sound of Music and Wizard of Oz and that kind of stuff around the holidays on broadcast television. In the UK, they, like, your favorite shows made these long 2-part, 3-part Christmas specials that they would put on. And it would basically be like a movie that would air over 2 nights or all in one shot. And it was these like amazing Christmas special episodes of your favorite shows. But yeah, absolutely fabulous. It was like, I think it started in 92. In 2016, they released a movie, finally. I mean, it's just been this ongoing thing. I think the last 2 or 3 times it's come out, something absolutely fabulous has come out. Jennifer Saunders is like, that's it, I'm done, I'm not doing anymore. And then an idea comes up and she's like, okay, I'll give it another go.
Yeah, I mean, just for this to have broken through in that time, it is, kind of on that Mount Rushmore. Like I said, if you sort of don't count James Bond and Harry Potter, those sort of mega things that took over the world, in the 80s and 90s, like Absolutely Fabulous, Fawlty Towers, Monty Python, like those, Doctor Who, maybe, those were the things that, it was like not everybody knew about them, but like I feel like everybody knew somebody that, had some tape or something, about Ab Fab, as they say.
Exactly. And I was remembering it was Absolutely Fabulous. They played it on Comedy Central. This was a show that they used to play when it was just like all they had were things in reruns and these stand-up little cut together clip shows. That was like, I know I used to watch this, but I watched it before I understood, like, even that they were so drunk. You know what I mean? Like, I guess, whatever, 92. I knew that they were drunk, but like, I just didn't really kind of get it. I just remember seeing bits of it and being like, what's happening here? So, must have still been early teens.
All right, let's move on to Cybill.
Season 1, Episode 1, Virgin Mother Crone. Where have we heard that joke before?
Yeah, this is very similar to the turn in our Dharma and Greg.
Also a Chuck Lorre production. So he has reused his joke. He felt it didn't get enough due here as the premise for the very first episode of Cybill. He had to reuse it as a storyline in Dharma and Greg several seasons later.
Yeah, so this starts out, and I'm going to say for the first few scenes here, there are no apparent similarities to Absolutely Fabulous. No. This does not bear any resemblance. I was pretty curious as to why we chose it. This is a sitcom about an actress who is filming a vampire movie.
So it's a sitcom about a working middle-aged actress. She's never really had a big break. She's always gotten close. That's the premise of the show, is that she will be kind of consistently humiliated throughout the run of the series because women can only ever be these 3 things. You have your virgin phase, you have your mother phase, and you have your crone phase. And then I think Marianne, who's played by Christine Baranski, who, thank God, she's in the show.
Yeah, she's really good.
She brings the house down. And like this first season actually caused a lot of waves because Christine Baranski she won all the awards, she got all the credit. Like, she was the big breakout star from the show, and Cybill was, and has said in years since, that she was very jealous, and she tried to work with Chuck Lorre to decrease the storylines that Marianne had.
So silly. It just
that was one of the arguments that led to Cybill and Chuck Lorre butting heads, and because she had bigger star power than he did at the time, she was able to get the network to fire him.
It's like Jerry Seinfeld going, can we make Kramer a little less eccentric? He's distracting from me. Can we make George less funny? Like, whatever, rising tide raises all ships, But yeah, let's talk about Cybill for a minute, because that sort of dilemma that, this character is facing, I guess, is probably the way Cybill kind of sees herself, or sees the entertainment industry from her point of view. I'm just thinking off the dome, like, she's the lady from Taxi Driver. That's her initial sort of breakout. But even in that, she's a big part of that movie, but, you know, the real breakout in Taxi Driver, besides Robert De Niro, is
Jodie Foster.
Is Jodie Foster.
Right.
Yeah, and so, like, that's kind of neither fish nor fowl. And then she's on Moonlighting for years. That's great. Bruce Willis goes on to become a huge movie star.
Yes.
And so, yeah, like, I'm sure Cybill Shepherd, if you bring up her IMDb, she's in a handful of movies. She does this and that. But yeah, working actress that doesn't quite know how to position herself in Hollywood going into her 30s sounds about right.
Or going into her 40s.
40, yeah, well, I'm being polite.
Yeah, she's becoming like the part of this episode is that her oldest daughter, so she's been married and divorced twice. She has a daughter from each marriage.
Now,
her second husband wants to get back together with her. She's not having anything of it.
Now, this is a question I guess I'm going to have throughout this episode as we start going through the story. I'm wondering, you know, we watched the first episode of Absolutely Fabulous. Are these various elements or story beats taken from Ab Fab? So, for example, does that character have multiple ex-husbands?
Does she? Gosh, I don't remember. I know she definitely has the one, right? Like, or the one. I don't even know if they were ever married.
Daughter has a father of some
right.
sort.
I don't even know if they were ever married. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't watch enough Ab Fab to like have that deep knowledge. So I'm not sure. But no, I think the basic premise of the two friends and then just the one friend being so ostentatious about her drinking and being tall and thin.
Well, and the daughter. I think the element of the daughter, too.
Well, so yes, there's the daughter that's played by Alicia Witt, and she lives in the house. But there isn't the same dynamic here, right? Like this mom, Cybill, has it together. She's not a mess in the same way. Like she's not a self-perpetuating mess.
No.
In the same way that Eddie is an Ab Fab. What you have in Cybill is that circumstances, like she's just not able to get a grip on her career in the way that she would like to.
Yeah, there's still the general vibe of like having a teenage daughter is hard. I am overwhelmed by this whole thing.
Because in this episode and in this series, the teenage daughter is being rebellious. The teenage daughter wants to date an older man and go to some party, and then she does against her mother's wishes. And the thing she always hangs over her mother's head when Cybill says you can't do this, it's not a good idea. She's like, Mom, you were a party girl, you did all this stuff. So it's like she is what maybe Eddie would be if she reformed her ways at some point. Maybe the Ab Fab was the relationship that she had with her first daughter.
Her
first daughter, who is young, she's in her early 20s, and she is married, and she is now having a baby, and she's so excited to come and tell her mom. And so then, of course, Cybill's having this whole like existential crisis because she's realizing that she's becoming a grandmother.
Yeah,
she can't don't tell my agents, don't tell anybody, no one can know that I'm a grandmother because, oh my God, I will never get a part again.
Yeah, there's a funny reaction to that. The one of her ex-husbands comes, we meet the second daughter, we're getting little sort of...
Tom Wopat is the first ex-husband.
Okay.
And he's the one that she was her first husband. That's the one who's the dad of the daughter who's having the baby. Tom Wopat from Dukes of Hazzard, and then went on to star in a bunch of Broadway musicals.
Yeah. And so, we've got the first daughter, her storyline wants to date the older guy. Now we're getting the other daughter. Her storyline is she's pregnant. And so this scene with the daughter and the dad, who's the ex-husband, and Cybill, and, they're bickering about something. And the ex-husband goes like, oh, come on, on, Cybill, lighten up. We're going to be grandparents. And they keep on going. And then there's this delayed reaction where like 5 or 10 seconds later, Cybill kind of stops what she's saying because that phrase, we're going to be grandparents, registers with her.
She's like, I can't handle that.
Yeah. The husband has a funny line where he says, once you have raisins, you never go back to grapes. You know?
Right. And then the other ex-husband is like, oh, I've heard it said once you have prunes, you never go back to plums. They're basically just giving her shit about being old because they know it's bothering her. And she's, you know, kind of putting up with it, but not really, sort of just rolling her eyes at the two of them. But that kind of sums up how this show sort of plays out, right? Yes, Cybill Shepherd is, as a human being, kind of known for being sort of hard to work with, in quotes, but a lot of that stems from just sort of the misogyny of her day. Yeah. And dealing with, you know, like we've seen over the years, sometimes, you know, women with big personalities or women with opinions have a harder time making their way in certain industries, in most industries.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing a little bit of that, like that off-screen dynamic. What she is consistently praised for in this show is how she was always willing to lean into the physical comedy and do anything like ridiculous that would kind of make her look not as sexy as she is known to be, right? Yeah. Like, to me, Cybill Shepherd and Sharon Stone, for a while there, I would just get the two of them mixed up in my head.
Yeah, see, there's a difference, though. To me, Sharon Stone has an edge. And part of it is that they play completely different parts. Sharon Stone played sex pot murderess roles.
So did Cybill Shepherd.
Okay, well, I guess that's what I haven't seen. Like I said, I've seen Taxi Driver, like her arguably most famous role. She's the political lady that he like tries and fails to take out on a date. She's a square.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't know. Maybe you're right. I just always kind of have her in my mind as this very sexy, kind of like, you know, almost film noir sort of lady.
Well, I think she has that look, but the stuff that I've seen her in tends to be she is an uptight foil to a male character who is fun, deranged, whatever,
like
and she's the sort of, the contrast to him.
Well, so like I was saying, she got a lot of praise for this series for leaning into all these things that wouldn't necessarily like live up to this sort of sex symbol image that she kind of had. But there was also this other side of, you know, the still wanting to like be in the spotlight, not having anything that would make her look dumb. Like she was really serious about getting rid of any storylines that like made her look dumb or desperate in a certain way for trying to get roles and yes, that was fine. But in other circumstances, no.
Yeah, when she's shooting this vampire scene, you're definitely supposed to get the sense of like being a working actress in Hollywood is kind of humiliating. Yeah. Like it's, you know, this dumb thing. The guy, he's sexually harassing her. At first, he's, you know, they're shooting this like seduction / vampire bite thing. He ends up kind of grabbing her, whatever. You're supposed to understand, like, it starts out as like this movie is so dumb, it's such a ridiculous situation to begin with, and then this guy is being a creep about it. And so yeah, it's very much sort of like, look at this crap I have to put up with. You know, I thought I was going to be a classy actress, and here I am doing all this crazy stuff.
And she keeps laughing because she's so uncomfortable because this guy had like garlic and onions for lunch, and he's like, you know, tickling her neck or like licking her neck when he's supposed to be, you know, biting her. And so she she breaks out into giggles and ruins the take a few times. And so the director comes over to her and is like, look, you got to get this right on the next take. They didn't even want somebody your age. Like they wanted somebody half your age. So like, you need to get this right.
On thin ice.
Exactly. And so she's like, okay, you know, I'm going to get it together. And then the button at the end is the family sitting around watching the show. Or no, it's her and Christine Baranski, right? Sitting there watching the show or the movie, whatever the vampire thing was, on television. And the camera after she dies, like the cops come in and they're like, yep, it was definitely another one of these attacks, but this one doesn't fit the mold. And it like zooms over to her dead body and is like, yeah, she's 3 times as old as the most recent victims.
This woman is clearly much older than the other victims.
And she's just like, oh, that's like the end of the episode. So we're just meant to kind of be on her side that like it's really, really hard to be an actress in your middle age and trying to like get roles. There's no roles for you, but
yes, and to be a mom. But yeah, to your point about the way she's presented, after these first few scenes where we've established all of these sitcom-y conflicts, the daughter wants to date the college guy, the other daughter is having a baby, so she's going to be a grandmother, blah, blah, blah. Their dialogue scene, Cybill and Christine Baranski, is at the gym, right?
Yes.
So talk about your complete, opposite. They're drinking water, doing frickin' Pilates or whatever, or one of them is.
I would say Christine Baranski, Marianne, is sitting on a piece of equipment in very high-end workout gear, drinking out of a sippy, like, workout bottle, which we come to know throughout the series that is always filled with martini or margarita or some sort of cocktail.
Yeah.
So she doesn't work out at all while Cybill is, doing all the stuff that she needs to do to keep herself fit so she can get parts. And they're having this whole conversation about how life is hard for the both of them. And this is kind of where it sets up what we need to know about Marianne's character, which is Marianne is very, very rich. They've been best friends forever. And the reason that she's very, very rich is that her husband, who is a doctor, who she put through medical school, did what many middle-aged doctors do, which is, I really need to have sex with this nurse or this assistant that I love so much, and I'm leaving you for this woman who's younger than our daughter. And so she's like, yeah, I have this big empty house and all this money, but none of the life that I thought I was going to have. So she's like biting and sarcastic and cutting, but there is a heart there that I think AbFab never really truly gets to that. They stay fully on the surface of we're drunk, we're riotous, it's crazy, very camp, very far out there, right? Whereas this show is trying to bring it down a little bit more into reality. Yes, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to sip on my sippy cup of martinis the whole time I'm there, and I have fabulous clothes and I'm fabulously wealthy, but also I'm here for my best friend and I'm kind of sad and she's here for me too.
Yeah, and she's very much in the role of the wacky best friend, so she gets to sort of have that outlandish way about her. So we've talked about the 2 ex-husbands. Now we're going to meet a new man in Cybill's life. So Tim Matheson, he woos her kind of the way Gosling woos Rachel McAdams in The Notebook. This completely like unsolicited, unwarranted, like from a vehicle, in this wacky situation. He asks her out like from his car.
Yeah, I thought it was a really cool meet cute.
I don't know.
I liked it. They were stuck in LA traffic and she drives this really fabulous like old 60s convertible, and he was like, whoa, is that a something something? And she like rattles off all this like car information and then a little bit more, and then she's like, sorry, I went on. And he was like, no, wow, that was really impressive. Okay. And he gets like immediately turned on because she has this like amazing car knowledge. And then they're like riding next to each other in traffic for a couple more, starts and stops. And on like the second or third stop, he was like, so, hey, can I call you? Can we go out? I just thought it was really charming.
I guess it's fine. I think Matheson in general, he's got a little bit of like a creepy principal kind of vibe to me. Like he's not super charismatic in my opinion.
No, he definitely always plays the guy that like knows he's handsome.
Yeah, and just I don't know. Again, look, it's the 90s, people, you got to meet people somehow. Just something about his like vehicular pickup routine. I don't know, kind of got on my partners. Yeah. But so she's got
he had game.
She's got a date with him. That's what they're talking about at the gym, or one of the things. She feels old, blah, blah, blah. And they go out on this date. She confides a little bit in him about how she's going to be a grandma. He says, oh, that's kind of sexy. The date overall goes well.
Right.
And then we get our final sort of sitcom-y plot turn. ED, right? Erectile dysfunction.
Right. So they're snuggling on his balcony, looking out over, some part of LA. I don't know it well enough. And then they decide to, go into the bedroom. And then the next scene we get is her, coming over to Marianne's house, Christine Baranski's house, all upset and, all disheveled and pissed off, and she's like, he couldn't get it up.
Yeah. There's something about before they go inside, there was a cat named Winky that was eaten by a coyote.
Right.
There's all this crazy contrivance so that she can have the joke when she's confiding to Christine Baranski. She goes this is not about the death of Winky. And Christine Baranski's like, are you sure? Isn't that what we're talking about? Very silly. This was another thing that I was wondering if it was maybe taken from an Absolutely Fabulous plot, if maybe somewhere along the line that was a story that one of them had a boyfriend, that couldn't perform.
Yeah, possibly.
But
where they blame it on themselves, because that's what she's doing. She's saying it the reason he wasn't able to was because I'm not attractive. I'm so old and ugly.
Yeah. And so none of these individual stories really get resolved, right? This is all just sort of meeting the characters,
yes,
setting up the situation. And then with all these things sort of floating around, it goes back to the scene we already talked about where they're watching on TV her vampire movie where she's dead and they're this corpse is too old. Maybe it's a different killer.
Yep.
And so you're just sort of meant to understand all right, we got a taste of Cybill, what her life is like, and this is going to be it.
Yeah. I actually really enjoyed the show. I remember watching it back in the day. It was, I watched the show. I remember liking the show, thinking it was fun. We get a little bit of, Alicia Vitt actually plays piano. She was a child prodigy, so she plays piano in this episode, and it happens live. I always love when that stuff is real.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really nice feeling show.
Yeah, it's funny. I watched this too. Normally we talk about this at the beginning of the segment. When I was thinking about this, we always talk about how, in the late 90s, when we were getting older, that's a dark period where we didn't watch as many sitcoms. This must have been at a time the opposite, where I was just shutters open wide. And I was please give me your new shows. So tell me what you have to offer.
1995. That tracks, though, because it was
we're
you were
still in high
early
school.
high
And
school.
it's we're able to drive.
Yeah.
And, we start having more robust social lives. And it's funny looking back on this, there are several shows like this where I do remember this being sort of appointment television, at least for a little while.
Yeah.
Caroline in the City.
Yeah.
And it's why was I interested in this show about a middle-aged woman struggling to raise her teenage daughter and, having chats with her friend at the gym? It was just one of those things. This is one of, whatever networks major sitcom offerings, and so we're gonna give it a spin. And I remember watching this. I don't remember much of it. I remember Christine Baranski, this was probably my first taste of her, and then just seeing her in a movie every year or so for the rest of my life, and just being oh, she's really funny.
Yes.
But I don't know. Looking back on these, what do we think? Remakes in general, do we prefer the British, the American? Should they keep doing this? Should they just stick with the originals?
Well, I don't think we could stop them even if we wanted to. So I definitely think it should keep happening, although I do sort of see it kind of tapering off because of the access that we were talking about. We can watch the BBC shows. So that show Ghosts that Currently, there's like a US version and a UK version that's like on right now. People were telling me about the show Ghosts, that is, you know, a British import, and you got to watch it, and it's so good. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, but now there's another version. Same thing with Shameless. Shameless was a show that I had heard about, and people were like, oh, you should watch that. It's really good. And then I turn around one day and I'm like, what the fuck is William H. Macy doing in this British show? Oh, it's a remake. So like, I think we definitely have more access to the original British shows now. So I wonder how that is changing the landscape, if we would definitely see a lot more direct remakes, or if that means that they're purposefully changing things, kind of in the way that Community episode where they have Dr. Spacetime, which is like supposed to be like Doctor Who. Yeah. And then they go to this convention and Chevy Chase's character shows up and gets on the panel to watch the US version, and give feedback. And so the US version is completely ruined because they have a panel with people like Pierce on it. And so the US version is completely different and it doesn't take off. So I just wonder how much of that, like, are we going to get more of that now that it has to be so different? Or are we going to be more just like The Office, where season 1 and season 1 are almost the same?
Well, but The Office is a very interesting example because, that it starts out the same, but it ends up very different. Yeah. And that's a case where the original Office, the UK one, obviously just being from the UK, it's not going to ever have the same amount of reach, but that was very well known over here.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And I had that on DVD long before they were making an American version, but that was almost just a case of like, well, they're not making this anymore, people want more of it, and let's pass this off to the American company. And it ended up being something kind of like you're saying, when you made the comparison between Christine Baranski's character and the Absolutely Fabulous analog, and how the American one kind of had a little more heart to it. And that's obviously what they did with The Office. Shameless is an interesting example because, I haven't seen the British version, but the American...
Oh, that's funny. I haven't seen the American version.
Well, the American version feels very steeped in its sort of urban Chicago, like working class, downtrodden Chicago setting. And it seemed like, okay, whatever Shameless was, and obviously they can have, socioeconomic situations like that over there, they did a good job of saying, oh, okay, the thing that you made over there, that gives us an idea to do a similar thing over here. Yeah. Kind of like that movie Death at a Funeral was a British movie, and then they made the American one with Chris Rock and the mostly black cast, and it was like, okay, this is like a specific cultural change that we can make, where obviously there's something about that original idea that we're responding to, but there's also something meaningful about this transposing that we're going to do to this other culture. Yeah. And I think at this point, that's kind of the only reason to do it. Like I said at the beginning, I think we're kind of at the point now. I think whether you want to be generous about it and say people are more open-minded to international things, or if you want to be cynical and say everything's kind of made by these global companies and it's more efficient for them to just make stuff that everyone can watch. Yeah, we're kind of getting to the point where, watch Let the Right One In, the vampire movie from Sweden. You don't need to watch Let Me In, the American remake. Watch Run Lola Run, the great German movie from the late 90s. I feel like we're finally at the point where we have that access. Right. And people have that open-minded attitude that it doesn't feel so artsy-fartsy, that there's fun stuff out there. Squid Game is not freaking like, some Kurosawa like classic.
No, but there has definitely been a discovery of the like Korean storytelling and the Korean dramas for sure. Yeah, but even stuff, Kim's Convenience, which I guess that's Canadian, but still, it's anything that's the same language is like, there really is no excuse at this point. Like, just watch the original thing. Yeah, but there is a point, like you were saying, though, about taking it when you have a specific idea of how it can be different, right? Now, we wouldn't have, if that was the case, we wouldn't have ended up with The Office, though, because The Office was beat for beat the same the whole first season, and it wasn't until later on that they started moving in that different direction.
No, you're
and
right.
so you kind of maybe...
But that was then. I mean, we're old. That was 20 years ago. I'm saying that now I think we're kind of at the point where they could be, where Stephen Merchant and Ricky Gervais would have that global audience, maybe not from the start, but would have it much sooner, and you wouldn't have to wait for it to catch on and go through that pipeline and then eventually get the interest of the world and, become a global thing.
Yeah, no, I guess you're right. And then then they do like The Office, the next chapter, when they want to like go in a new direction.
Yeah, or they just keep going with it or whatever. Yeah. But you just don't have that thing of like, well, people are going to like this. We just need to make it without these weird accents,
Right.
I feel like we're finally past that.
Yeah, it's fine. Just put on the closed caption.
Yeah. All right. So much for the British sitcoms. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, it's time to spark them up. We are getting caught smoking. We're going to watch Leave It to Beaver, Season 2, Episode 9, The Pipe, Different Strokes, Season 6, Episode 12, Where There's Smoke, King of the Hill, Season 1, Episode 10, Keeping Up with Our Joneses, and Abbott Elementary, Season 3, Episode 4, Smoking.
Yep, we're going to talk all about those smooth, flavorful cigarettes next week. And until then, we will consider this segment of the Sitcom Study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.